Today, we are going to look at the most shocking deaths ever captured on live TV. From routine safety demonstrations that turned into workplace nightmares, to trusted professionals whose final moments became an unthinkable tragedy broadcast. It was March 15th, 2016, when a routine safety demonstration turned into one of the most shocking workplace tragedies ever captured on live television. Graham Whitmore, a 52-year-old crane operator with 28 years of experience, was known throughout Portland's construction industry as the most reliable operator you could find. His colleagues at the mid-sized construction firm where he worked trusted him implicitly. If Graham was running the crane, everyone felt safe. The soft-spoken veteran had seen too many accidents over the years, which made him passionate about workplace safety education. That Tuesday morning, a local news crew arrived at the downtown construction site to film a segment about new safety regulations. Recent workplace accidents had prompted stricter guidelines, and Graham had volunteered to demonstrate proper crane operation procedures. He believed strongly that education could prevent the kind of tragedy that had claimed his colleague's life years earlier. The weather conditions seemed acceptable. Winds were gusting at 25 miles per hour, still within operational limits, according to standard guidelines. Graham's 150-ton mobile crane with a 180-foot boom was positioned to lift prefabricated concrete panels for a new office building. Site foreman Jordan Reeves, 45, who had worked alongside Graham for over a decade, supervised the demonstration while news reporter Aubrey Mitchell conducted interviews about the safety improvements. At 10:45 a.m., Graham began the lift sequence, raising a 4-ton concrete panel while cameras rolled. The construction crew, including flagman Tommy Taylor, a 34-year-old father of two known for his jokes that lightened the mood on site, watched as their most experienced operators showcased proper lifting techniques. Then, disaster struck. A sudden wind gust, briefly exceeding safe operating limits, caught the concrete panel mid-lift. Despite Graham's immediate corrective actions, the load began swinging violently. The momentum created dynamic forces that exceeded the crane's stability calculations, causing the outriggers on the windward side to lift from the ground. Graham attempted to lower the load quickly, but the swinging motion had created an unstable pendulum effect that couldn't be controlled. The massive crane began tipping forward, its 180-foot boom sweeping in a deadly arc across the construction site. Following protocol, Graham remained in the operator's cabin rather than attempting to jump. The crane tipped forward until the operator's cabin struck the ground with tremendous force. The impact was so violent that the reinforced steel frame crushed instantly. The safety glass shattered, and the seat's shock absorption system was completely overwhelmed. Emergency responders arrived within 6 minutes, but the cabin was so severely deformed that specialized extraction equipment was needed. Graham was found unconscious with massive internal injuries, severe trauma to his chest and head from the crushing forces. Paramedics worked for 8 minutes attempting resuscitation, but Graham was pronounced dead at the scene due to multiple crushing injuries and internal hemorrhaging. The very man who had dedicated his career to safety had become a victim of the unpredictable forces he had spent decades learning to control. The construction site was immediately shut down for 2 weeks during OSHA's investigation. The news footage, which captured every horrifying second, became crucial evidence that led to new wind speed protocols across the industry. Graham's family established a safety foundation in his name, ensuring that his final act, teaching others about crane safety, would continue saving lives long after his tragic death. It was August 7th, 2017, when a routine bridge inspection became a nightmare that would be captured on camera and haunt viewers forever. Claudia Reynolds, a 38-year-old structural engineer with 15 years of experience, was considered one of the Bay Area's most thorough bridge inspection specialists. Working for the Regional Transportation Authority, she had developed innovative inspection techniques that were being adopted statewide. Her colleagues respected her meticulous approach to safety assessments and her ability to explain complex engineering concepts in ways anyone could understand. That Monday morning, a documentary crew had arrived at the Harbor Point Suspension Bridge, a century-old span just north of San Francisco Bay, to film a segment about aging infrastructure. Producer Michael Torres, 41, had spent months researching experts for his piece about the challenges of maintaining century-old bridges, and Claudia was his first choice. Her reputation for thoroughness and her passion for infrastructure preservation made her perfect for the project. The inspection platform was a temporary structure suspended 180 feet beneath the bridge deck, designed to allow close examination of support cables and joints. Bridge Maintenance Supervisor Carl Peterson, 56, a 30-year veteran who knew every bolt and cable on the structure, oversaw the safety protocols. Weather conditions were ideal, clear skies with minimal wind, perfect for both the inspection work and filming. The platform had been inspected that morning and met all safety requirements for its 5,000-pound load capacity, secured by 4 suspension cables. At 11:30 a.m., Claudia was positioned on the platform, explaining stress fractures in the bridge's support cables to the documentary crew. She had performed hundreds of similar inspections throughout her career, always maintaining her reputation for safety and precision. Then, catastrophe struck without warning. One of the primary suspension cables contained an internal manufacturing flaw, a microscopic fracture deep within the steel core that routine visual inspections couldn't detect. Under normal load, that hidden weakness finally gave way. The platform immediately tilted at a 30-degree angle. Claudia grabbed the safety railing as the structure swayed violently. A second later, the sudden shift in weight caused another cable to give way. With only 2 lines still holding, the entire rig lurched further, its frame twisting under uneven tension until the deck section tore away from its frame. Although Claudia was wearing a safety harness, the catastrophic failure of the platform and its anchoring system resulted in her falling 180 feet toward the bay below. Claudia was thrown clear as the platform structure disintegrated, plunging toward the bay, a fall that lasted roughly 3.3 seconds. The impact with water at that height and velocity caused massive trauma equivalent to hitting concrete, resulting in immediate fatal injuries. Coast Guard rescue boats reached the scene within 8 minutes, but recovery efforts confirmed what everyone feared. Claudia had died instantly upon impact. The remaining platform section dangled precariously until emergency crews secured it, using helicopter-assisted cable removal and securing operations. The Harbor Point Bridge was closed for 72 hours while emergency inspections were conducted. Investigation revealed that the failed cable had a manufacturing defect dating back 6 months, leading to a nationwide recall of similar equipment. Footage recovered from the crew's cameras helped investigators confirm the sequence of the platform's failure, while metallurgical analysis identified the precise fracture point in the defective cable. The combined evidence led to new inspection protocols for temporary work platforms. Claudia's family used settlement proceeds to fund engineering scholarships for women, ensuring her legacy would inspire future generations, while new safety regulations protected countless other engineers. It was November 22, 2015, when an investigative news report turned into a deadly inferno that would shock viewers across the nation. Preston Hale, a 29-year-old safety inspector with a background in chemistry, had recently been promoted after identifying several safety violations at industrial facilities throughout Detroit. Working for a local warehouse that stored commercial chemicals and industrial supplies, Preston was known for his dedication to workplace safety and his belief that proper procedures could prevent disasters. That Tuesday afternoon, investigative reporter Amanda Walsh, 33, arrived at the warehouse with her crew. She had been working on a story about improper chemical storage practices for 3 months, following complaints from environmental groups. Preston had agreed to speak anonymously about safety concerns, believing that public exposure would force necessary improvements across the industry. To avoid alerting management, Preston arranged to meet the crew at the far end of the storage area, away from the main office where supervisors were stationed. The warehouse contained industrial chemicals, including paint thinners, cleaning solvents, and agricultural supplies stored in large drums. Warehouse manager David Kim, 48, was unaware of the news crew's presence and had been struggling with storage space issues. Cameraman Steve Wilson, despite his 12 years of experience, had little familiarity with chemical safety zones or industrial hazard signage. Unknown to everyone, the building's electrical system had been experiencing intermittent problems for months. A faulty junction box that maintenance had been meaning to repair had been sparking intermittently due to corroded connections. At 2:15 p.m., Preston was showing the news crew examples of improperly stored chemicals in one section of the warehouse, explaining safety violations he had documented. Meanwhile, 200 feet away, the faulty electrical junction box had been sparking all morning. A paint thinner drum stored in a poorly ventilated corner near the electrical box had developed a slow leak over the past week, allowing flammable vapors to build up in that confined section of the warehouse. At 2:18 p.m., the electrical box finally failed completely, creating sustained arcing that ignited the concentrated chemical vapors in its immediate vicinity. The initial fire spread rapidly through that section, creating intense heat that caused multiple chemical drums to rupture and explode. Preston and the news crew, hearing the explosion, ran toward the exit. Preston, slightly behind the others, turned back to guide Amanda when the secondary blast tore through the aisle. The fireball engulfed his position, inflicting severe burns as he inhaled superheated gases that instantly damaged his respiratory system. The others, closer to the loading bay, were shielded by stacked drums that absorbed most of the blast. The explosion's force and debris caused additional trauma, including multiple fractures and internal injuries as he was thrown against warehouse equipment. Preston collapsed immediately, his respiratory system severely compromised by the inhalation of toxic gases. Emergency responders arrived within 7 minutes, but structural damage and ongoing chemical fires prevented immediate access. Preston was extracted after 12 minutes, but had already succumbed to respiratory failure from inhaling superheated gases and toxic chemicals. The warehouse fire burned for 6 hours before being contained, requiring hazardous materials specialists. Environmental cleanup took 4 months due to contamination from released chemicals. Investigation revealed the electrical failure was unrelated to the news crew's presence and had been a long-standing maintenance issue. Preston's death led to new state regulations requiring the immediate repair of electrical hazards in facilities storing volatile chemicals. His family established a chemical safety awareness program for industrial workers, ensuring Preston's final act of exposing safety violations would continue protecting others. It was June 14, 2018, when a live television health segment became a tragic medical emergency that would leave viewers stunned and heartbroken. Vivian Carter, a 45-year-old emergency room nurse with 20 years of experience at a regional hospital in Phoenix, was known throughout the medical community for her quick thinking and expertise in trauma care. Her colleagues respected her ability to remain calm under pressure and her dedication to patient care, often working double shifts to help understaffed departments. That Thursday morning show host Rebecca Martinez, 37, had specifically requested Vivian for a live television segment about emergency preparedness and first aid techniques during National Safety Month. The broadcast was taking place in the hospital's emergency department to promote community preparedness for medical emergencies. For several weeks, Vivian had been experiencing occasional chest discomfort and fatigue, but she attributed these symptoms to work stress and the long shifts that had become routine in her demanding career. Her colleagues had noticed she seemed tired and had mentioned she should see a cardiologist. But like many healthcare workers, she had postponed a planned doctor's appointment, prioritizing her patients' needs over her own health concerns. The live segment was scheduled to demonstrate basic first aid techniques, including wound care, choking response, and when to call 911. Dr. James Patterson, 52, the hospital's emergency department director, was scheduled to join but was delayed due to an emergency. Camera crew veteran Tim Garcia was known for his sensitivity in healthcare settings. At 8:42 a.m. during the live broadcast, Vivian was demonstrating how to properly clean and bandage a wound while explaining when injuries require professional medical attention. She had been feeling increasingly uncomfortable for the past 30 minutes with chest tightness and left arm pain, but she recognized these as potential heart attack symptoms she had been ignoring for weeks. Ironically, while explaining the importance of not delaying medical care for serious symptoms, Vivian experienced severe chest pain and shortness of breath. She attempted to continue the demonstration briefly, not wanting to disrupt the live broadcast, but her speech became labored and she began sweating profusely as the symptoms intensified. Within 90 seconds, Vivian collapsed while reaching for demonstration supplies, experiencing a heart attack caused by a coronary artery blockage that had been developing over months. The very nurse who had saved countless lives was now fighting for her own. Hospital staff immediately began emergency resuscitation procedures, while cameras continued rolling, creating a real medical emergency during a safety demonstration. Dr. Patterson, who had just arrived, took over resuscitation efforts and ordered immediate preparation for emergency cardiac catheterization. Despite advanced life support measures including defibrillation and emergency medications, Vivian went into cardiac arrest twice during the 15-minute resuscitation attempt. The medical team worked extensively to restore circulation, but the heart attack had caused significant damage to her heart muscle. She was pronounced dead at 9:12 a.m. after all resuscitation efforts failed, with the entire medical emergency having been broadcast live to thousands of viewers. The hospital immediately implemented counseling services for staff and viewers who witnessed the tragedy. Investigation revealed that Vivian had been experiencing classic heart attack warning signs for weeks, but had delayed seeking care due to work commitments. The tragic broadcast led to increased awareness about recognizing heart attack symptoms and the importance of healthcare workers receiving urgent care. Vivian's family established the Vivian Carter Memorial Fund to provide cardiac screening for emergency department staff, ensuring her legacy would protect the healers who dedicate their lives to saving others. It was April 3rd, 2017, when a master craftsman's dedication to preserving history became the final chapter of his own story. Captured in horrifying detail by documentary cameras, Miles Harrington, a 61-year-old master craftsman specializing in historic building restoration, had spent over 35 years preserving America's architectural heritage. He owned a small restoration company and was considered one of the Southeast's leading experts in 19th century masonry and stonework techniques. Miles was known for his insistence on authenticity, using traditional methods and materials whenever possible. That Monday afternoon in Charleston's historic downtown district, documentary director Karen Phillips, 44, had arrived with her crew to film a piece about preserving America's historic architecture and the skilled artisans who maintain these structures. She had spent 2 years researching craftsmen like Miles for this project about disappearing trades. The project involved restoring the facade of a 150-year-old courthouse, focusing on intricate stonework that required specialized climbing and precision work. Miles' apprentice, Danny Walsh, 26, had been learning restoration techniques for 3 years and considered Miles a father figure. Building owner Margaret Stevens, 58, had invested her life savings in the restoration. The scaffolding system was a combination of traditional and modern components, chosen to accommodate the building's unique architectural features. Although the scaffolding had been inspected that morning and met safety codes, hidden metal fatigue in older components went undetected, a limitation of visual inspections that investigators would later cite as a contributing factor in the collapse. At 1:30 p.m., Miles was working on the building's third-story facade, carefully chiseling away damaged mortar from between original stones, while cameras documented his techniques. The scaffolding platform was positioned 35 feet above the sidewalk, with Miles wearing a safety harness connected to the building's anchor points. Unknown to anyone, vibrations from restoration work over several days had loosened critical connection bolts in the scaffolding's primary support structure, while Miles concentrated on a particularly challenging section of stonework, explaining his techniques to the documentary crew below. The scaffolding began to shift slightly. The movement was initially minimal, but as Miles adjusted his position to reach a difficult area, the accumulated stress caused a primary support joint to fail catastrophically. The scaffolding section collapsed suddenly, with Miles falling 35 feet. His safety harness line became entangled in the collapsing metal framework, causing the rope to wrap around scaffolding components during the fall. The entangled safety line created severe internal trauma as it jerked tight mid-fall, then snapped, allowing Miles to strike the sidewalk with full impact. The scaffolding debris landed around and partially on top of him, causing additional crushing injuries to his legs and torso. Emergency services arrived within 5 minutes, but extraction required careful removal of heavy scaffolding components. Miles remained conscious initially, speaking to paramedics, but went into traumatic shock due to massive internal bleeding and multiple fractures. He lost consciousness after 12 minutes and died at the scene despite aggressive resuscitation efforts. The restoration project was halted while investigations determined that metal fatigue in older scaffolding components had contributed to the failure. New regulations were implemented requiring more frequent inspections of scaffolding systems. The documentary footage provided crucial evidence and led to industry-wide changes in scaffolding safety protocols for historic restoration projects. Miles's restoration company was continued by his apprentice, Danny, who established a safety foundation in Miles's memory. The courthouse restoration was eventually completed using Miles's original plans, with a memorial plaque honoring his contribution. The master craftsman, who had dedicated his life to preserving the past, had ensured that future artisans would work more safely. It was September 19th, 2016, when a routine chemistry demonstration turned into a deadly explosion captured on live educational television, shocking viewers and forever changing laboratory safety protocols. Eleanor Briggs, a 34-year-old chemistry instructor at a community college in Austin, had earned her PhD in organic chemistry and dedicated 8 years to teaching. She was passionate about making science accessible, developing innovative methods that made chemistry engaging for non-science majors. Her colleagues knew her for meticulous safety procedures and her ability to explain complex concepts. That Monday morning, educational producer Janet Jones, 39, arrived with her crew to film a segment about community colleges in science education. Eleanor volunteered to demonstrate basic chemical reactions, showing how hands-on learning helps students understand scientific principles. The laboratory was well equipped but housed in a 1970s building with aging ventilation. Student assistant Maria Williams, 20, a chemistry major who worked with Eleanor for 2 semesters, admired her teaching approach. College Dean Roberta Davis, 51, was present to discuss science education funding. Eleanor had never experienced a serious laboratory incident, making her perfect for demonstrating safe practices. The demonstration involved reactions commonly used in introductory courses. At 10:25 a.m., Eleanor was demonstrating the reaction between hydrogen peroxide and potassium permanganate to show oxidation principles while cameras recorded. She had performed this demonstration hundreds of times, always following strict safety protocols. Unknown to Eleanor, the hydrogen peroxide had been mislabeled during a recent stockroom reorganization. The 10% laboratory-grade solution had been decanted into containers identical to those used for the 3% educational grade version, both clear, unmarked squeeze bottles, differentiated only by a small printed label. The new stock had been shelved in the same position as the usual classroom supply. Trusting the system she'd used for years, Eleanor retrieved the bottle from its usual spot without realizing the error. To the eye, there was no visible difference, no color, no odor, no viscosity change, and she had no reason to suspect a mismatch. When Eleanor added potassium permanganate to what she believed was dilute hydrogen peroxide, the reaction occurred with significantly more violence than the expected gentle fizzing. The beaker shattered immediately, sending hot chemical solution and glass fragments onto Eleanor's face and upper body. The more concentrated reaction generated intense heat and oxygen gas rapidly, creating a vigorous reaction that splashed burning solution across Eleanor's lab coat and exposed skin. Chemical burns formed immediately on her face, neck, and hands from the concentrated hydrogen peroxide, while glass shards caused multiple lacerations. Eleanor's safety shower activated within seconds, but the 10% hydrogen peroxide solution had already caused significant chemical burns that penetrated into tissue, particularly around her eyes, and exposed skin. She immediately inhaled some of the reaction vapors and steam, causing respiratory irritation and airway damage. Emergency services arrived within 8 minutes. Eleanor had lost consciousness due to the chemical burns affecting her respiratory system and the shock from the unexpected reaction severity. The instructor dedicated to teaching safe practices had become a victim of a supply chain error. Eleanor was transported to a regional burn center, where she died 6 hours later from complications related to chemical burns and respiratory damage from inhaling the reaction vapors. The college suspended all chemistry activities pending a complete review of storage procedures. Investigation revealed the mislabeling occurred when 10% laboratory-grade hydrogen peroxide was incorrectly placed in containers marked for 3% educational-grade solution during routine inventory reorganization. The educational footage became part of nationwide safety training for educators, emphasizing chemical verification procedures. Eleanor's family established a laboratory safety scholarship fund, and new regulations required multiple verification steps for demonstrations, ensuring her tragic death would prevent similar accidents. It was September 11, 2015, in Los Angeles, California. The late afternoon heat shimmered across the asphalt, blurring the horizon of industrial buildings and side streets overhead. News helicopters circled in steady loops, their cameras fixed on a single silver sedan weaving through traffic. Darren Koenig, 34, had once been an auto mechanic specializing in transmission repair. He was skilled and capable of diagnosing problems by sound alone. But years of unstable work and alcohol dependency had eroded his reputation. 2 prior DUI convictions and mounting credit debt pushed him toward desperation. The sedan he drove that day, a gray Nissan Altima, was reported stolen from a client's lot 3 days earlier. Koenig had likely no long-term plan beyond avoiding arrest. The car's plates were flagged that afternoon during a routine traffic patrol on Vermont Avenue. When officers initiated a stop, he panicked. Police chases in Los Angeles often unfold under heavy helicopter presence, with live broadcasts from news networks turning them into public spectacles. Knowing the terrain, Koenig steered into a maze of industrial roads near Florence, attempting to lose visual contact. The pursuit lasted 23 minutes. Police dispatches confirmed speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour along major arterials before narrowing into warehouse districts. Patrol units maintained pursuit distance, wary of collisions. The media helicopter maintained overhead tracking, broadcasting live to multiple stations. As he entered a dead-end cul-de-sac lined with freight containers, 3 patrol vehicles blocked the exit. The sedan idled in the center of the lane, motionless for nearly 10 seconds. Officers took cover behind open doors. Commands were shouted through loudspeakers, but there was no response. Koenig's right hand rested on the steering wheel. His left reached toward the passenger seat, where he had retrieved the .38 caliber revolver moments before broadcast commentators initially speculated he was surrendering. The camera zoomed in through the windshield. Viewers briefly saw him raise the firearm, pressing it against the right side of his head, before the feed cut seconds later. At 4:12 p.m., a single gunshot shattered the stillness. The windshield glass showed a small exit hole with cracks spreading outward from it. The car lurched slightly as his foot slipped from the brake. Officers approached cautiously after confirming no further threat. Within moments, the television feed cut abruptly to an aerial traffic shot as anchors audibly gasped. The camera operator failed to pan away in time, and the studio delayed in cutting the feed, allowing a brief glimpse of the aftermath to air live for several seconds across local stations. Responding officers broke the driver's side window to access the vehicle, while others called for emergency services. Paramedics arrived within approximately 7 minutes, but found no signs of life. The revolver, a .38 caliber, was recovered from the floorboard with 1 spent casing. Dashcam and helicopter recordings later confirmed the sequence precisely, leaving no ambiguity about the cause of death. The coroner's report listed a single contact gunshot wound to the right temple, with an exit wound on the contralateral side of the skull, consistent with a self-inflicted contact shot. Toxicology later revealed a blood alcohol concentration of 0.11%, indicating impairment, potentially contributing to his impaired judgment during the pursuit. The cause of death was ruled as self-inflicted cranial gunshot injury. In the aftermath, Baptist's broadcast stations received hundreds of viewer complaints over the live footage. 2 broadcast companies jointly issued apologies. LAPD officials later confirmed that coordination protocols would be reviewed for future media pursuit coverage. It was October 12, 2016, near the eastern outskirts of Mosul, Iraq. The air was heavy with dust and the faint metallic scent of spent munitions. Coalition and Iraqi forces had begun their push toward the city's outer districts that week, and intermittent artillery fire echoed through the low hills. Jun Seok Hwang, 39, was a South Korean war correspondent. Over 8 years of field reporting, he had covered Gaza, Benghazi, and Kabul. Huang's network agency had pushed for more immersive coverage during the opening phase of the Mosul offensive. Segments that placed reporters visibly within advancing zones rather than behind coalition checkpoints. Huang's partner, 41-year-old Iraqi cameraman Nabil Farhan, had worked with multiple international outlets since 2004. Together, they operated with limited protection, one flak vest each and 2 helmets, and a compact camera rig with a directional mic. The courtyard chosen for filming was a half-collapsed compound surrounded by waist-high walls, open enough for clear sound, yet partially sheltered from direct fire. The risk, however, was constant. Earlier that morning, several mortar rounds had landed sporadically in nearby alleys, prompting brief evacuations before the area fell quiet again. By noon, the gunfire had stopped entirely. Huang saw the pause as an opportunity to record a brief segment emphasizing the tentative calm despite protocol requiring full protective gear. He opted for a lighter appearance, open vest, rolled sleeves, to create a sense of accessibility for viewers back home. Nabil agreed, noting the reduced noise levels and lack of activity overhead. Their local escort waited near an armored pickup about 165 feet away, urging them to finish quickly as the distant pop of small arms fire and muffled explosions persisted beyond the eastern ridge. The camera began rolling live at 12:42 p.m. Huang stood near the low concrete wall, gesturing toward the smoke plumes in the distance, while Nabil framed the shot. The ambient sounds of sporadic rifle fire and faint artillery thumps carried through the air, but otherwise the scene remained quiet. Then, without warning, an incoming mortar round detonated roughly 25 feet behind them, the first to strike inside their sector since sunrise, sending lethal shrapnel through the courtyard. The sudden blast threw the camera sideways, partially shattering the lens, and fragments of metal and concrete struck both men. Nabil, positioned directly behind the line of impact, absorbed most of the shrapnel to his upper torso. His body fell forward instantly. Huang, partially shielded by the low wall, was struck by debris and suffered multiple shrapnel wounds, as well as blast overpressure effects that caused fatal internal injury. The recording captured only a fraction of the event. The sudden roar, a cloud of dust, a few seconds of distorted audio, then static. When the feed cut, both men were already dead. Coalition medics reached the site after approximately 40 minutes, delayed by sniper fire and blocked access routes. The bodies were first transported to a nearby coalition forward operating base south of Khazir, before being flown onward to an Erbil field hospital for confirmation and repatriation processing. The coroner's report documented penetrating shrapnel injuries to the thorax and abdomen in both victims. Noting fatal blast trauma consistent with rapid death at the scene, the network aired a silent black screen the following morning, followed by a brief memorial segment. Nabil's family later received a brief acknowledgement from a journalist group. It was November 5th, 2017, off the southern coast of Lombok, Indonesia. The sea looked deceptively calm from the camera platform, bright blue, dotted with whitecaps. But beneath it, the currents moved unpredictably in long, dragging surges. The production team for the Island Endurance Challenge had chosen this cove for its visual contrast of turquoise shallows and open surf. Rio Santoso, 26, worked at a retail outlet in Surabaya but had built a small following online through fitness clips. His goal was to leverage the reality show to expand his reach. He swam recreationally and posted videos of himself doing open water laps near Surabaya's beaches, though always within marked areas. This challenge from the island trial segment, retrieving flags from the surf, fit his persona, young, fit, and fearless. The show tested endurance in natural conditions. Contestants swam about 165 feet from shore, retrieved 2 weighted flags, and returned through the current. Safety divers and jet skis monitored the course, but post-monsoon surf was unpredictable. A marine warning that morning advised against swimming past the coral shelf, yet the segment stayed on schedule to avoid reshoots. By early afternoon, wind gusts intensified, driving waves toward the reef. Rio volunteered to go first, eager to impress. Fitted with a wrist tracker and harness cam, he declined a buoy vest, saying it would slow him down. At the director's cue, cameras rolled live as he entered the water, reaching the flag within 30 seconds and glancing shoreward for approval. On his return, the current shifted sharply southward. The footage later showed the change. His forward progress stalled, then drifted diagonally. A safety diver began swimming toward him, but was briefly slowed when his fin strap brushed against a loose length of the flag tether in the surf. Rio's arm movements grew uneven. He released the flag and attempted to turn back. From the camera angle, his struggle appeared controlled at first, prompting the crew on shore to assume he was adding drama to the scene. Seconds later, he raised one arm weakly, barely above the surface. Then he disappeared. The safety diver reached the area within 45 seconds, but found only bubbles and floating fragments of the flagpole. A second diver joined, locating him about 15 to 20 feet below, pinned momentarily by the surge against the reef slope. He was brought to the surface, unresponsive, and laid on a rescue board as cameras still recorded on-site paramedics performed CPR for 20 minutes without achieving return of spontaneous circulation before pronouncing him dead. The recording ended with crew members covering the body with a silver thermal blanket. A forensic medical report later confirmed asphyxia due to drowning, with pulmonary edema consistent with prolonged submersion. Time of death was estimated at 2:43 p.m. based on paramedic logs and tracker data. Safety divers' equipment logs and tracker data corroborated the duration between distress and recovery. Indonesian marine authorities issued citations and initiated a safety review of the production. The show's producers publicly denied responsibility, framing the tragedy as an unfortunate accident. The network quietly removed all footage of the incident from its archives. The segment was later reshot under stricter safety protocols with a new contestant. It was November 4th, 2016, on a rural stretch of Kentucky Highway 119 in Pike County. The campaign bus carrying a small media crew rolled steadily along the winding road. What appeared to be an ordinary political assignment concealed a moment of fatal recklessness. Megan Hollis, 27, had spent 5 years covering state and local politics for a small network. Known for her meticulous reporting and tenacity, she had recently been promoted to mobile correspondent, often broadcasting live from moving vehicles. She was ambitious, sometimes pressuring herself and her crew to prioritize live coverage over caution. Dean Carter, 43, was a camera technician with nearly 2 decades of experience, tasked with keeping mobile feeds stable while navigating cramped bus interiors. The bus they traveled in was outfitted with dashboard-mounted cameras and a small stabilization rig for live streaming. Neither Megan nor Dean was wearing a seatbelt during the segment, as both needed to move freely for the live broadcast. The tight corners and narrow shoulders of the Pike County roads required constant attention. Megan often leaned forward, speaking into the mic while checking the live feed on a mounted monitor. Dean adjusted lenses and monitored signal strength, navigating around loose wires and camera cases in the aisle. They had both received weather advisories warning of wet road conditions and limited visibility during dusk. But the drive schedule remained unchanged to meet the rally's start time. By 4:15 p.m., the bus approached a gentle curve near a low embankment. Megan crouched slightly, emphasizing a point for her live commentary, while Dean angled the camera to capture both the road and passing fall foliage. Then, a deer suddenly emerged from the adjacent woodland. The driver swerved sharply to avoid collision, tires sliding on the wet surface. Megan's hands tightened on the microphone, eyes widening, and Dean's shoulder pressed against the edge of a camera rig as the bus lurched. The live stream showed the interior camera jerking violently as the cabin tilted, followed by visual distortion and brief motion blur before the signal cut out entirely. Later scene reconstruction showed that the bus skidded off the asphalt, rolled onto its right side, and slid roughly 30 feet into a roadside ditch. Coming to rest against a concrete drainage culvert, Megan was thrown forward, head striking the metal support near the front entry steps with crushing force. Dean collided with the camera rig, his chest absorbing the brunt of the impact while equipment tumbled across the floor. Witnesses from a nearby farm reported the overturned bus and immediately called emergency services. First responders arrived approximately 13 minutes later, finding Megan unresponsive, pinned in the front section of the bus, and Dean conscious but in severe pain. Both were extricated carefully. Megan's injuries were incompatible with life, while Dean was transported to a regional hospital with multiple fractures and contusions. The coroner's report listed cause of death for Megan Hollis as blunt cranial and cervical trauma, with associated skull fractures. Dean Carter sustained blunt thoracic trauma with multiple rib fractures, but survived following surgery. Vehicle inspections confirmed the bus rolled due to loss of traction on the wet pavement, combined with abrupt steering. After the crash, the network quietly upgraded its vehicles, but offered no formal safety retraining, issuing only an internal safety memo. Dean returned to work under stricter supervision. It was October 31st, 2014, in Mumbai, India. The city stirred with the quiet hum of early morning traffic, while inside a central news studio, the pre-dawn broadcast began routinely. However, a series of small oversights would soon escalate into catastrophe. Rajiv Das, 44, was a senior studio technician with nearly 20 years of experience in live television production. He was responsible for lighting rigs, camera setups, and emergency protocols, often working long hours to ensure uninterrupted broadcasts. Asha Patel, 30, operated the teleprompter for the channel's morning news, known for her precise timing and focus under pressure. Nilesh Rana, 25, was a production intern eager to impress, handling cables, monitors, and ad hoc technical tasks, while shadowing Rajiv. All three understood basic fire safety and had undergone mandatory drills, but long-standing pressure to maintain uninterrupted live coverage meant protocols were often secondary to broadcast deadlines. The studio environment was complex. Overhead lighting rigs were supported by metal trusses, insulated with polyurethane acoustic foam panels, chosen for their sound-dampening qualities, but not rated for flame resistance. Electrical circuits ran densely through conduits, occasionally overloaded during multi-camera setups. The crew routinely tested high-wattage lights, unaware that insulation near the main rig had begun degrading, and that circuit breakers showed rusted contacts, reducing trip efficiency. Despite this, maintenance checks had been delayed, and management had stressed uninterrupted Halloween programming to boost ratings, effectively discouraging downtime for safety inspections. At 5:07 a.m., the anchor began reading headlines as faint smoke appeared in the camera frame behind him. Staff initially dismissed it as fog from equipment or a staged Halloween effect. Rajiv moved toward the source beneath the lighting truss, unaware that a minor electrical fault had ignited a smoldering ember in foam insulation. Asha continued operating the teleprompter while glancing at monitors. Nilesh was checking camera feeds when a sudden spark ignited surrounding panels. Within roughly 2 minutes, the polyurethane foam erupted into open flame, and the fire raced across the overhead truss area moments later, producing thick, toxic black smoke typical of burning polyurethane. Visibility dropped almost instantly. Rajiv inhaled dense smoke first and collapsed near the lighting bay. Asha and Nilesh attempted to escape moments later, but were overcome before reaching the exit. Emergency alarms failed to trigger because the alarm circuit had been intentionally bypassed months earlier during a ceiling renovation and never reconnected. The nearest exit door was blocked by stacked lighting cases and unused set panels, trapping them inside as smoke filled the space. Footage from nearby fixed cameras briefly captured silhouettes before the dense smoke obscured all visibility. Fire suppression systems were outdated and could not control the fast-spreading flames. Crew members outside attempted to pry doors open, but dense smoke and high heat prevented entry. By the time firefighters breached the main studio, all 3 victims had succumbed. Their bodies were later recovered near their respective workstations. partially obscured by collapsed equipment and charred insulation. Fire brigade logs and post-incident structural assessments confirmed the rapid ignition and failure of suppression systems. Post-mortem examination reports listed all 3 deaths as due to acute smoke inhalation. Forensic medical findings confirmed severe hypoxia and carbon monoxide toxicity consistent with polyurethane combustion fumes. Structural inspection revealed degraded foam panels and corroded electrical conduits, directly contributed to the rapid ignition and flame spread. Following the incident, authorities cited the studio for outdated fire suppression and inadequate emergency door access. The network initiated phased retrofits across its primary studios, adding automatic sprinklers, emergency power cutoffs, and upgraded smoke detection systems. Internal policy changes mandated pre-broadcast safety checks and prohibited live programming in studios lacking verified emergency readiness, aiming to prevent future tragedies of this magnitude. It was May 21st, 2018, in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. The early morning sky was heavy with dark clouds, gusts whipping sand and spray along the waterfront. Evacuation orders had already been issued for low-lying neighborhoods. Yet on the edge of the storm-swept promenade, a small broadcast crew prepared for live coverage. Arif Rahman, 38, was a seasoned meteorologist and field reporter for a local television channel. He had reported from Bangladesh's coastal regions for over a decade, covering cyclones, monsoons, and occasional river floods. Colleagues described him as methodical on air, yet prone to testing limits off camera, often positioning himself closer to hazards than protocols recommended. Arif carried his personal anemometer and windproof recording gear, trusting that past experience navigating storm fronts would keep him safe. He was motivated by professional recognition and the pressure of maintaining the network's reputation for real-time storm coverage. His team relied on lightweight cameras, tripods, and satellite uplinks, all set up along the waterfront behind a concrete storm surge barrier. The technical environment was unforgiving. Jagged rocks, eroded walkways, and waterlogged soil could give way under sudden force. Metal signage, intended as safety markers, was already corroded at the base, and crew members had noted visible rust and loose bolts the day before. Despite these warning signs, Arif insisted on filming near the highest wind exposure to demonstrate the storm's intensity to viewers inland. At 5:30 a.m., the crew began their live segment. Gusts were approaching 70 to 75 miles per hour, with sustained winds over 60 miles per hour, pushing sheets of spray across the barrier. Arif stood beside a heavily corroded metal post, gesturing to the storm surge and explaining expected wind velocities. Crew members positioned themselves a few feet away with cameras and cables, occasionally shouting instructions over the roar of the wind. Neighbors in nearby high-rises later confirmed seeing the sign sway under the pressure, and one assistant expressed concern over its unstable base, which Arif ignored. As the broadcast continued, gusts intensified. The corroded base plate and bolts had been weakened by years of saltwater exposure, leaving the post unstable under lateral wind pressure. Arif stood close to the base to gesture toward the surge. The stress from the wind and rusted fittings caused a sudden anchoring failure. The post sheared from its foundation and toppled toward him. As it fell, the fractured lower section and exposed bolt struck his neck, causing a deep penetrating injury that severed the left carotid artery. He collapsed instantly as the camera feed jolted, capturing only a brief blur before transmission cut out. Crew members rushed forward, attempting improvised first aid while one called for help. They tried to control the bleeding using camera cloths and gaffer tape, but strong winds and blowing debris made efforts nearly impossible. Emergency responders took roughly 8 to 12 minutes to arrive due to debris-blocked streets and rising coastal water. When paramedics reached the scene, Arif was pulseless and cyanotic. All resuscitation efforts failed. Structural inspection later confirmed that the post's corroded base plate and anchor bolts had completely deteriorated under combined salt exposure and wind load, making structural failure inevitable. At the recorded wind speeds, footage and eyewitness accounts corroborated the collapse sequence and the instantaneous nature of Arif's injuries. Post-mortem examination findings determined the cause of death as exsanguination due to a penetrating neck injury from fractured metal hardware, with associated cervical fractures and blunt impact trauma. The forensic medical report noted extensive soft tissue laceration consistent with impact from a collapsing metal post. In the following week, the company aired a short memorial segment honoring Arif's dedication to public safety and acknowledging the preventable risks that had contributed to the tragedy. A weather authority issued statements urging strict adherence to safety protocols for extreme weather coverage. It was June 18, 2015, in São Paulo, Brazil. The morning TV show started at 8 a.m. The studio had couches, a table, and screens on the wall. Workers wore headsets and moved around. The control room counted time between parts of the show. Mariana Costa was there. She was 27 years old and worked as a junior producer. She had been at the TV station for a few months. Her job was to help with guests, check microphones, and keep track of what happened when. That day she met guests at the back door, walked them past wires, and took them to the waiting room. She checked names, times, and notes the host would need. The studio was in a concrete building. Other shows used it too. Above the stage was a metal frame about 25 feet high that held lights and speakers. Weeks before, workers had added 2 bars for more lights, tape-marked seating spots, and a camera on wheels pointed at the couch. When the health segment began, Mariana walked a nutrition guest from the waiting room to the stage. She stood behind the main camera where viewers could not see her, while the floor manager gave signals. Music played as the host introduced the topic, and a second camera filmed a wide shot. The live part started. People heard a small rattling sound from above. It sounded like loose metal parts. Some looked up, then looked down again. They did not know what the sound was. The lights flickered once, then worked normally. The talking continued. The main camera stayed still while the second camera moved closer. Without any warning, a section of the rigging gave way when the quick clamps failed, shearing bolts and dropping a crossbar. People who saw it said it sounded like a gunshot, then a long scraping sound. A metal bar fell down and pulled wires and lights with it. The piece fell at an angle and hit the set near the host's left side. The camera shook when the operator jumped but kept pointing forward. People watching at home saw the host jump back and leave the picture. The falling metal hit the floor and slid toward the area behind the cameras. Mariana was there, near a roll of wire and a plastic cart with extra microphones. The metal piece and 2 lights fell on her side. Workers yelled for the show to stop, but the control room kept the show on air for several seconds. People shouted to cut off the camera, and some tried to lift the metal with their hands. A worker later told investigators he heard bolts break before the fall. The head of engineering said the new metal bars were held up with quick clamps made for lights, not for holding heavy weight. The director remembered pressing the talk button and telling people on the floor to get away. Power to part of the frame was turned off to prevent sparks. Firefighters came with a tool to lift one corner of the metal frame. The metal weighed several hundred pounds. Workers made a circle to give space. The TV show switched to a long set of commercials. Emergency workers started chest compressions and checked if she could breathe. A police officer put up yellow tape around the area and took pictures of the clamps, broken bolts, and bent metal bar. The control room saved the raw video and printed the time logs. A producer told the families of the guests that the show was stopped. Mariana was declared dead at the scene. Her funeral happened 3 days later at a small church a few miles from the station. Co-workers, friends, and local TV workers came. The station paid for a reception. City inspectors said the studio broke safety rules. This included using wrong hardware and not having proper weight certificates. The station was fined and had to submit a new plan for the overhead frame. New rules required checking bolts, keeping weight charts on file, and getting signed approvals before any live show under hanging equipment. It was June 23, 2016, in Valencia, Spain. The city's beach was full of people who came for the yearly festival called La Noche de San Juan. This tradition brought thousands each year. The shoreline had bonfires, lanterns, and music. Television crews stood at the edge of the sand with portable lights and cameras on tall stands to film the celebrations for the evening news. Anil Ortega was one of the organizers that night. He was 32 years old and worked as an elementary school teacher in the area. He was active in his community and often helped at school fairs and neighborhood events. For the festival, he helped with a lantern release. He guided people to a stage near the water where the cameras could film the scene. Anil held a clipboard with names and checked the timing for when the lanterns should be lit. The stage was built with metal poles about 10 feet tall. It was covered in red and yellow cloth banners made of thin fabric that had not been treated with flame retardant. Lanterns hung along the sides, and portable lights pointed at the crowd while reporters gave live commentary. When night came, hundreds of paper lanterns went up into the sky with flames inside thin shells. People clapped as the lights spread above the water, and cameras filmed across the horizon while anchors explained the tradition. People who saw it later said that around 10:15 p.m., a sudden sea breeze gusted across the beach, catching several lanterns at once and pushing them sideways. One drifted into the stage area where Anil stood. The lantern hit a banner and quickly set the cloth on fire. The flame spread upward to another decoration, and within seconds, the stage corner caught fire. People near the front screamed and pointed, while others began moving back. The live broadcast continued and showed smoke rising and crowd members running away. Some people grabbed bottles of water and tried to put out the flames. But the fire spread faster than expected. The overhead lights flickered as the heat reached their wires. Anil was standing near the metal poles and tried to move toward the side. People who saw it remembered him slipping in the scramble as others pushed past. As the fire weakened the support, a section of the stage frame and burning cloth collapsed toward him, pinning him underneath. The camera caught the moment as smoke filled the picture. People shouted for fire help and assistance, their voices mixing with the sound of cracking wood and metal. Several men rushed forward and tried to pull the burning material aside. Others waved frantically for fire extinguishers. Crew members pulled cables out of the way, and reporters yelled for the broadcast to be cut. But it stayed live for several more seconds. Firefighters arrived minutes later with hoses and sprayed the burning metal poles while pushing back the crowd. People who saw it said the heat could be felt from 20 feet away. Paramedics used stretchers and worked under floodlights while police formed a circle around the site. The broadcast switched to commercials, leaving viewers at home with the image of smoke rolling across the beach. Anil was taken to a local hospital but was declared dead a few hours later. Burn injuries and blunt trauma from the collapsing frame were listed in the report. His funeral was held in Valencia that weekend. Fellow teachers, students, and community members attended and filled the small church where services were held. The school where he taught closed for the day, so staff and children could attend. Authorities investigated the stage design and concluded that paper decorations and open flames created unnecessary risk. New rules were announced that summer requiring flame-resistant materials and stricter permits for festival structures. Organizers across Spain were warned that lantern releases near decorated stages would need additional safety clearances in the future. It was October 9th, 2016, in Charlotte, North Carolina. The local racetrack was hosting an amateur stock car event that brought a small crowd of people watching in families. Folding chairs lined the outer fence, and a few vendors sold snacks near the entrance. The track itself was a half-mile oval with worn asphalt and concrete barriers that had been repaired from earlier seasons. A group of volunteer workers handled timing, flag signals, and safety checks. John Phillips was one of the drivers that evening. He was 41 years old and worked as a mechanic during weekdays at a small auto shop outside of town. On weekends, he raced in local circuits and was proud to put his knowledge of engines to the test. Friends and co-workers often stopped by to help him work on his car, a used stock model with basic safety equipment added. This race was one of many shown online through a small community channel, watched mostly by family and racing fans. About 200 people filled the stands as cars lined up. Engines started when the flag dropped, and they went around the track near 100 miles per hour. The first laps ran smoothly, with John steady in the middle of the group. Crew members gave signals from pit row, while cameras on stands showed the action live. Around lap 15, people who saw it later reported that one car lost control coming out of the second turn. It moved into John's lane and hit the front of his vehicle. The contact sent his car spinning toward the outside barrier. The impact with the guardrail came with a loud crack, and sparks shot up as metal scraped concrete. The vehicle crumpled at the front, and a line broke under the hood. Flames started almost instantly. The broadcast camera kept rolling and showed orange fire pouring from the engine area. People watching screamed and stood up from their seats. People who saw it described hearing a muffled boom as fuel caught fire. Smoke billowed across the track while the wrecked car sat against the barrier with flames spreading along its sides. Pit crew members ran with portable fire extinguishers, but the fire was too strong for their efforts. The heat forced them to step back. Viewers online saw crew waving for emergency help, while others tried to reach the driver's side door. Spectators recalled seeing John struggling against the window net, striking it with his arm as the fire spread. Within minutes, firefighters stationed at the track rushed in with hoses. They sprayed foam across the wreck and knocked down the flames. The car's frame, however, had already been covered by fire, and heavy smoke filled the area. Paramedics pulled John out once the fire was under control, but there were no signs of life. The race was stopped right away. Officials cleared the stands, and police secured the crash area with tape, while investigators documented the scene. Crews loaded the burned car onto a flatbed and towed it to a holding lot for inspection. The live stream cut to a standby screen, leaving viewers with the last image of fire crews working by the barrier. John's funeral took place later that week at a small church near Charlotte. Family, co-workers, and fellow racers attended and shared respect for a man who spent much of his free time on the track. A convoy of local drivers led a procession in his honor. Authorities reviewed the racetrack afterward. Inspectors noted the old guardrail design, which lacked modern energy-absorbing barriers, and flagged the limited fire equipment at trackside. Officials promised stricter checks on safety gear and improved procedures for volunteer staff at local racing events, hoping to prevent similar accidents in the future. It was March 4th, 2017, in Des Moines, Iowa. The local high school gym had been changed into a performance hall for the evening. Folding chairs were arranged in long rows, and a temporary stage was set up near the basketball hoop. A community television crew brought in 2 cameras and small spotlights to stream the talent show live for families who could not attend. The event was meant to showcase music, dance, and comedy from students and recent graduates. Lara Peters was one of the performers. She was 19 years old and a college freshman who had been invited back by friends still at the school. She agreed to sing a short piece and stepped onto the stage set up against the far wall. Teachers directed the lineup of acts, and a student council member handled the microphone stand and speakers. The gym's scoreboard displayed the time, and parents filled the bleachers and clapped as each act began. The stage itself was a platform made of several wooden sections fastened together. Each piece stood about 2 feet high and was supported by metal frames on folding legs. The surface was covered with a black mat to make it look uniform under the spotlights. Teachers had checked it earlier in the day, but it had been rented from a local supplier, not built permanently for the gym. When it was Lara's turn, the announcer called her name, and she walked onto the stage with the microphone. The crowd applauded. A camera on a tripod filmed her as she began to sing. She sang her song in the gym. The audience clapped along softly as the song went on. Midway through her performance, people who saw it reported hearing a sharp cracking sound. The platform shifted under her feet as one of the folding leg supports collapsed. The wooden section dropped sharply before the frame twisted and gave way. Lara lost balance and fell backward and struck the back of her head at an angle on the polished gym floor, causing severe trauma. The camera kept rolling as gasps and screams filled the gym. The live feed shook when a student operator pointed it toward the commotion. Parents and teachers rushed toward the stage and waved others back to give space. People who saw it said some people called for an ambulance while staff tried to check her condition. The event came to an immediate stop. Teachers guided students out of the gym while others cleared the chairs near the stage. Paramedics arrived minutes later through the side entrance and wheeled in a stretcher and medical bags. They worked quickly under the harsh lights, placing a collar on her neck and loading her onto the stretcher. The television crew cut the broadcast, leaving a blank screen for those watching at home. She was transported to a nearby hospital, but was declared dead shortly after arrival. The official report cited blunt force trauma to the head caused by the fall. Her funeral was held a few days later at a small church in the city. Family members, classmates, and teachers attended and filled the pews. The service was simple, with a short program and a small reception afterward. Authorities opened an investigation into the rented stage equipment. Inspectors found worn bolts and loose fastenings on the rental frame, some of which had stripped threads and had not been tightened to specification. The district was cited for failing to verify safety compliance of outside rentals. In response, new rules required all temporary platforms to be inspected by maintenance staff before events. Schools across the district received updated guidelines on stage construction and equipment use. The incident left a mark on the community. Other schools in Iowa began double-checking stage rentals before concerts and assemblies. The state's education department also issued a bulletin urging caution when setting up temporary equipment for public events. It was August 3, 2017, in Houston, Texas. A town hall meeting was being held in a community center auditorium and broadcast live on a local television station. Folding chairs filled the room, and a stage with a lectern had been set up for the congressional candidate. Security officers stood near the entrances, and several reporters were stationed at the back with cameras and microphones. Samuel James was in the audience. He was 46 years old and worked as a city bus driver. He was known for his steady presence on long routes and his reliability with passengers. Samuel had come to the meeting to hear the candidate's views on public transportation, a topic that directly affected his work. He found a seat in the second row, just a few feet from the stage, while cameras adjusted their angles to capture both the crowd and the speaker. The meeting began with the candidate giving an opening statement about infrastructure and local jobs. People clapped through the room, though not all people there agreed with the message. About 20 minutes in, a group of protesters entered through the side doors carrying signs. Some chanted slogans, while others raised their voices against the campaign. People who saw it later said the disruption quickly changed the mood in the hall. Security attempted to calm the group, but tensions rose when shoving broke out between protesters and seated people. The broadcast cameras, still rolling, caught part of the confrontation as people stood from their chairs and tried to move back. Within minutes, the disturbance spread to the exits. People who saw it remembered chairs being knocked over as the crowd moved toward the doors. Samuel was seated close to the stage and was swept into the rush. He stumbled near the aisle and was knocked down by the press of bodies. He was forced to the ground and compressed under the weight of people falling and pushing from behind. Those nearby heard faint cries, but were unable to move against the weight of the crowd. The live feed captured the scene in the background and showed officers struggling to push through with shields. The candidate was quickly escorted off the stage as more chaos unfolded. People who saw it reported that the crowd noise made it difficult for anyone to hear instructions. Some officers called for people to remain calm, but the room was already in disorder. Samuel remained pinned beneath others for several minutes till the flow of people slowed. When he was finally pulled out, he was unconscious. Paramedics arrived inside the hall and worked quickly to help him. The broadcast cut to a wide shot of the exterior of the building, with reporters speaking over the confusion. Police put tape around the entrances as stretchers were wheeled through. The crowd outside was directed to leave, and the event was declared over. Samuel was transported to a nearby hospital, but he did not survive. The medical report listed compression injuries sustained during the crush as the cause of death. His funeral was held a few days later at a local church. Dozens of bus drivers attended in uniform to honor his memory, and co-workers from the city transit department joined the service. The pews were filled with family, friends, and members of the community who had seen him daily on his routes. Authorities later reviewed footage from the broadcast and from security cameras inside the hall. Investigators noted that officers had been slow to separate protesters from the seated audience, and the lack of clear evacuation procedures contributed to the panic. City officials announced stricter rules for crowd control at political events, requiring higher security presence and updated response plans to prevent a repeat of the tragedy. It was November 12, 2018, in Guadalajara, Mexico. The afternoon bullfight was part of a weekend event at one of the city's oldest arenas. Thousands of people filled the stands and waved flags and shouted as cameras broadcast the match across national television. The arena had hosted countless fights before, with its circular walls, gated areas near the ring, and sections for vendors selling food and drinks. Diego Torres was one of the vendors. He was 35 years old and had worked at the arena for years, carrying trays of bottled water and soft drinks to people in the mid-level rows. He lived in a nearby neighborhood and used the job to support his 2 children, saving money for their schooling. Regular attendees recognized him, and he was a steady presence at nearly every event. That day, he had taken his usual position near the vendor's walkway behind the lower stands. The fight began with a matador and his team drawing the bull's attention with bright capes. The animal charged repeatedly and hit the sand floor with heavy steps. The crowd cheered each pass as the matador sidestepped, and the assistants waved their cloths. Cameras focused on the matador's stance, while commentators described the action for television viewers. Around 20 minutes into the fight, the matador attempted a close maneuver. He moved too slowly, and the bull slammed into the barrier at the edge of the ring. People who saw it said the wooden barrier, reinforced with metal but weakened over time, had been patched before and did not hold. The impact broke part of the structure, leaving a gap wide enough for the bull to push through. The animal forced its way past the barrier and into the narrow passage used by staff and vendors. People watching screamed as the bull's horns swung side to side. Diego, who had just crouched near his crate of drinks, was directly in its path. The bull knocked him off balance and sent him to the ground. The live broadcast caught the moment in the corner of the frame. The animal's horns hooked under his torso, lifting him before tossing him aside. People in the stands called out warnings, and the sound of panic rose across the arena. Several security guards froze briefly, shocked by the breach. Others rushed in with poles and capes to distract the animal, pulling it away from the vendors' area. Drinks fell on the walkway, and nearby vendors moved away. Guards got the bull back into the ring and closed the damaged barrier with a gate. Diego was critically injured and motionless. Paramedics stationed at the arena moved quickly. They carried him on a stretcher through a side tunnel and into an ambulance. The cameras shifted back to commentators, and the broadcast cut to a replay of earlier moments in the fight. The announcers explained that the event was temporarily suspended. Diego was taken to a nearby hospital, but doctors could not save him. His injuries from the goring and impact were fatal. His funeral took place in his neighborhood days later. Hundreds attended, including other arena workers and longtime residents who knew him. Vendors marched together carrying flowers, and his family received donations to help with expenses. Authorities launched an investigation into the incident. Inspectors found that the barriers, a mix of wood and metal, had not been properly reinforced in years and were weaker than recommended. Officials promised to upgrade the barriers with stronger steel supports and to add new emergency procedures to protect both staff and people watching during public events. The arena reopened weeks later with visible changes, including reinforced barriers and more security staff stationed near the vendor areas. The reforms were announced as necessary steps to prevent another tragedy in front of a live audience. It was May 22, 2017, in Warsaw, Poland. The day had ended with a brief rain shower that left the streets damp and rooftops slick. On one of those rooftops, a young man prepared to stream another live run, unaware that it would be his last. Marek Wojcik was 22, a courier who spent his days navigating Warsaw traffic on a bike. Parkour was his escape, an obsession that gave him a sense of freedom he didn't find in deliveries or routine shifts. Friends described him as restless but determined, someone who sought out the edge between risk and control. His online following of around 3,000 had grown steadily, and he was proud that a small shoe brand had sent him free trainers, hoping he'd showcase them in his videos. For Marek, that felt like a first step toward legitimacy. The practice itself was technical. Parkour required not only physical ability, but also careful judgment of surfaces, distances, and momentum. The pre-war buildings in Prague were unpredictable. Weathered brick, parapets with hidden cracks, tar roofs softened by rain. Typically, runs were rehearsed in segments, but Marek preferred one-takes, streamed live, heightening the pressure and authenticity. He carried no safety equipment. His only backup was Kuba, a friend who acted as spotter and cameraman from safer positions. That evening, they climbed a rusted fire escape onto a tenement roof. Gusts were stronger than forecast, pushing against their jackets. The roof surface was damp, and Kuba suggested they skip the last leap in Marek's planned route. But Marek insisted, saying he needed one clean sequence to show off the shoes. Kuba hesitated, but didn't push harder. With sunset lighting the Warsaw skyline, they set up the live stream. The first moves went smoothly. Marek vaulted a low pipe, rolled across one rooftop, and regained his stride quickly. The stream's viewer count ticked upward, hearts and comments filling the screen. Kuba's voice occasionally called directions, making sure the frame stayed steady. But as Marek approached the final gap, a 5-meter leap across 2 roofs divided by a courtyard, the risk was clear. The landing edge was a narrow parapet of old brick. Kuba told him not to jump, but Marek accelerated. determined to finish. Residents on a nearby balcony later recalled seeing him plant a foot on the parapet. The brick crumbled under the force. Marek's momentum carried him forward. He flung out his arms, fingers grazing the opposite edge, but he couldn't hold. His body pitched downward. The fall was brutal. Witnesses saw him strike a lower ledge, spinning midair before colliding with the corner of a metal dumpster. The sound was sharp, followed by silence as he landed face down on the wet courtyard ground. Kuba arrived moments later, sobbing and yelling for an ambulance, and one passerby dialed help. Sirens were audible within minutes, but when paramedics reached the scene, resuscitation attempts failed. Marek was pronounced dead from massive head trauma. His funeral in Praga Ponox was small, attended by family, friends, and members of the local parkour community. His worn trainers were placed on the casket. City inspectors soon sealed rooftop access points and cited the building owner for unsafe parapets. A Warsaw parkour collective began free safety workshops, hoping to prevent similar losses. It was October 3, 2018, in El Nido, Palawan. A brief squall had passed earlier in the day, leaving the air heavy and the sea restless. On the northern end of Nakpan Beach, waves struck rock outcrops in irregular sets, some stronger than others. The spot looked scenic, but it carried quiet danger. Janelle Cruz was 19, a hospitality trainee from Quezon City. She had joined two classmates on a budget trip before their semester resumed. Friends described her as outgoing and eager to document every part of her travels. Her Facebook account had about 1,500 friends, mostly relatives and schoolmates, and she streamed casual videos to keep them engaged. It was all about validation from people she knew. She saw these posts as proof that she was moving toward a future career in tourism, learning to package experience and location into something appealing. The landscape demanded more respect than she gave it. Nakpan Beach stretched long and sandy, but the northern point narrowed into jagged rock covered in dark lichen, made slick from earlier rain. Still, Janelle and her classmates were focused on the panoramic view they could show. The plan was to hike the outcrop before sunset and stream a 360-degree shot. A resort guard advised them not to linger close to the edge, pointing out the slippery surface and the unsettled sea. They acknowledged the warning, but kept climbing. The livestream showed Janelle laughing, the camera swinging wide to capture the coastline. The trio stayed a few meters from the drop at first, but slowly edged closer for the angle they wanted. The wind stiffened as they set up near the tip. Janelle positioned herself with her back to the ocean. The first sets of waves were forceful, but not extraordinary, spraying against the lower ledge and splashing her calves. Her classmates steadied themselves, one holding a bag, while the other filmed with a second phone. The live stream carried only the sound of wind and water until a stronger surge arrived. The next sequence came in two waves. The first struck the rock and drenched their shoes. The second rose higher and faster, surging chest high against the ledge. The stream jolted as the water slammed into Janelle's legs. She lost footing instantly. The phone spun, catching only a flash of her outstretched arms before she disappeared. One classmate lunged and managed to catch her wrist, but the backwash pulled so sharply that their grip slipped apart. Two fishermen 30 meters away later described seeing her surface once, face down, dragged between rocks by the retreating surge. Another local guide waded into the channel, but retreated when a third wave crashed, nearly knocking him under. They immediately called for the authorities. The Coast Guard recovered her an hour later along the north end of the beach. Resuscitation attempts failed. Her body showed blunt injuries consistent with impact against the rock channel and drowning. Her wake in Quezon City was modest. Relatives and classmates gathered quietly, projecting her travel clips without sound. Local officials installed new hazard signs in multiple languages and required resorts to monitor the outcrop during swell advisories. It was August 9th, 2016, in Johannesburg, South Africa. The first trains of the morning moved slowly out of the yards, carrying workers across the city. The air was still cool, but a sharp current ran overhead, where high-voltage lines stretched across the commuter rails. Few passengers noticed the danger above them, but one man had planned his morning around it. Shadamini was 23, an apprentice electrician from Soweto. He had spent his teenage years drawn to risky challenges, using his technical background as justification for pushing limits. While his workdays were spent under supervision, wiring junction boxes and tracing faults, his evenings and weekends were marked by stunts on rooftops and rail bridges. He had gathered around 2,200 followers on Periscope, where he streamed dawn runs and daring climbs. He saw it as an escape from routine, a way to be recognized outside of the narrow confines of training and wage work. His cousin Bana often filmed, half concerned, half enabler. The rail network itself posed the hidden threat. Johannesburg's metro rail trains draw power from overhead catenary wires carrying 3,000 volts of direct current. The wires are set at a height that keeps them just clear of train roofs on straight tracks, but closer on bends or bridges. Electricity arcs when a body comes near, even without direct touch. Train surfers often underestimated this invisible hazard, thinking only a physical grab could kill. Sia's electrical training should have made him more cautious, but his confidence left him blind to the risk. That morning, he and Bana boarded a slow-moving commuter before sunrise. The plan was to climb onto the roof, stream a balancing run, and end with a triumphant pose against the skyline. Bana reminded him of the 3 kilovolt lines, but Sia brushed it off, insisting he knew the systems better than the engineers who maintained them. Comments began flooding the live feed, viewers urging him to stand tall, to show fearlessness. The train picked up speed as it left the yard. Sia pulled himself from the carriage window, gripping the edge until his feet found the roof. He rose, arms out to steady himself. Bana's voice can be heard off camera, telling him to stay low, but Sia edged forward, seeking a panel that would give him a dramatic shot. The track ahead curved, bringing the wires closer to the roof line. Bana described what happened next. As Sia straightened and lifted a hand, the gap between flesh and copper closed too much. A blue-white arc leapt from the catenary, striking with a crack like gunfire. His body stiffened instantly, legs locking in place. For 2 seconds he convulsed, then collapsed, his shirt catching fire where the current exited, smoke rising immediately. Commuters peered from carriage windows, horrified. Bana killed the stream and yanked the emergency lever, but the train could not be entered safely until power was cut. From the ground, onlookers saw Sia roll once along the roof before lying still, smoldering. His hands, chest, and face were blackened by burns. Once the train halted and the current was shut down, responders climbed up. Sia was carried down to the platform where brief CPR attempts were made, but his injuries were overwhelming. Paramedics called by train staff arrived within minutes, but the electrocution had stopped his heart and destroyed tissue beyond recovery. He was declared dead at the scene. His funeral in Soweto was small, attended by family, friends, and apprentices from his training program. His scuffed shoes and hard hat were placed beside the coffin. Rail authorities later released an awareness campaign about train surfing, showing the risks of overhead wires and reinforcing patrols at yards. It was December 17, 2017, on the Jaipur-Ajmer highway in Rajasthan. The winter air had cooled after dusk, but the traffic still moved steadily along the 6-lane corridor. The headlights of trucks and buses cut through the dark, joined by the hum of motorcycles weaving between them. Among them, one rider carried a phone mounted live to Facebook, his next broadcast minutes away from becoming a record of his final ride. Rohit Sharma was 21, a delivery rider by trade who balanced long days on 2 wheels with late-night attempts at building an online following. He had grown his audience to just over 4,000 Facebook followers, sharing tutorials on basic maintenance, fuel efficiency tips, and casual ride-alongs. His personality was enthusiastic and restless, shaped by both economic pressure and the validation of real-time viewers. Unlike established motovloggers with professional cameras and sponsors, Rohit relied on his pillion rider Imran, who held the phone during streams and kept an eye on comments. Safety was not ignored, but it was compromised. Their gear consisted of half-face visors and casual jackets instead of proper armored protection. The Jaipur-Ajmer highway was built to carry heavy intercity traffic. The road mixed passenger cars, buses, long-haul trucks, and unpredictable hazards like stray dogs. At higher speeds, especially above 100 kilometers per hour, a motorcycle's stability margin narrowed sharply. A sudden obstacle, minor wobble, or miscalculated evasive maneuver could turn fatal. Rohit knew the mechanics of his 150cc bike well, but he had also grown accustomed to pushing it further when his audience encouraged. On this night, the stream carried not only his voice, but also his willingness to gamble. The broadcast began with a dusk ride framed as a Q&A session. Viewers commented on his bike's performance and asked about modifications. Soon, requests for a top-speed run filled the feed. Imran hesitated, but eventually told him the highway ahead looked clear enough. This validation was all Rohit needed. He downshifted, twisted the throttle, and the engine climbed in pitch as the speedometer needle rose. As they accelerated, headlights of a truck loomed in the distance. The vehicle had signaled to turn right, shifting lanes. Rohit leaned left to overtake, judging the gap too narrow to slow. In that moment, a stray dog darted across the road. Rohit grabbed the front brake instinctively. The sudden deceleration unsettled the motorcycle, and the front wheel tucked under. The live stream caught the violence of the next seconds. Sparks exploded as metal scraped asphalt. The phone jolted, showing brief frames of tarmac and Imran's hand as he screamed. A truck driver behind witnessed the motorcycle skid sideways and slide beneath the rear axle of another truck. Rohit was thrown free, tumbling across the median. His helmet strap had not been secured tightly, and the shell flew off as his head struck a concrete post with crushing force. Imran, ejected into roadside scrub, rolled to a stop shouting his cousin's name. Good Samaritans turned Rohit onto his side, while some called for help. His breathing was shallow and wet. His chest visibly collapsed from the impact. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but his pulse faded despite attempts at CPR. Rohit's body was cremated in Jaipur days later. Dozens of riders accompanied the procession at a measured pace, engines subdued in mourning. Friends placed a pair of his worn gloves atop the pyre. Police ruled the truck and stray animal as uncontrollable elements, placing no fault beyond the choices made by the rider himself. Authorities issued a warning against live streaming while riding and introduced random helmet strap checks at checkpoints. It was March 11, 2016, in Thessaloniki, Greece. The sun had set, leaving the industrial outskirts dim and quiet, the air heavy with the faint odor of rust and dust. An abandoned flour mill loomed in silence. For one young man, the stillness was not a warning, but an invitation. By night's end, a broadcast meant to showcase urban exploration would instead capture his final moments. Nikos Papalos was 27, working days as a forklift operator in a distribution warehouse. Known among colleagues for his patience and steady hands, he often joked that the warehouse floor was too predictable. He sought escape through urban exploration, drawn to structures that had been left behind. He documented these trips on a modest YouTube channel, focusing on derelict mills, factories, and rooftops. His streams rarely drew more than a few dozen viewers, but he approached them with the seriousness of someone building a portfolio. He was methodical, but also eager to prove that he could handle risks that kept others away. His field of choice came with clear dangers. Old mills and silos were unstable, riddled with corrosion, brittle steel ladders, and poor ventilation. Confined spaces in such sites were notorious for oxygen deficiency and carbon dioxide buildup from decomposing grain dust. Without monitoring equipment, entry was guesswork. For urban explorers, the appeal lay in crossing thresholds others avoided, but few carried proper gear. Nikos relied on a headlamp, rope, and his phone. His friend Eleni accompanied him, partly to spot hazards and partly to read comments aloud, since Nikos sometimes drew viewers from outside Greece who followed his videos in English. That evening, they slipped past a broken fence and into the mill complex. Graffiti covered the walls, and piles of flour dust mixed with dampness underfoot. Eleni suggested staying along the elevated catwalks, where broken windows gave wide city views. Nikos had another plan. In the main chamber stood a row of silos, towering concrete cylinders whose sealed hatches had been pried open. He wanted to descend into one, claiming it would show followers there was no danger. The live feed showed him climbing down a fixed ladder into the silo, the headlamp beam cutting across stained concrete. At first, he joked about the echo, but soon, a cough slipped through his words. Eleni, filming from above, commented that the air felt strange. The camera caught Nikos swaying, his voice breaking as he said his head felt light. He sat down against the wall, then slumped sideways. His breathing grew faint, and then the stream fell silent, except for Eleni's rising panic as she shouted for him to move and began calling for help. A nearby resident, hearing her screams, phoned the fire department. Responders arrived within minutes, carrying gas monitors that confirmed oxygen-deficient conditions inside the silo. A firefighter wearing self-contained breathing apparatus descended, finding Nikos unresponsive, lips blue, skin cool. He was lifted out and laid on the concrete floor above, where CPR was attempted, but there was no return of pulse. He was declared dead at the scene. Municipal authorities later welded the silo hatches shut and posted hazard warnings in Greek and English. Police issued a general advisory about the lethal risks of confined spaces. warning specifically against streaming or trespassing in such areas. His funeral took place in a small neighborhood church, where co-workers and family gathered quietly. A pair of his worn work gloves rested atop the casket. His mother asked that his YouTube channel be deleted, saying she wanted no reminders of the last night. It was February 2nd, 2018, in Kazan, Russia. The evening streets were coated in snow, with the temperature lingering below freezing. On a small square near the university, a performance that was meant to brighten the night would instead descend into catastrophe. Anya Morozova was 24. Splitting her time between shifts as a cafe server and evenings spent busking. She combined dance with fire breathing, using the added danger to hold attention long enough for tips. Friends described her as disciplined, someone who spent hours practicing choreography, but also eager to stand out in a city crowded with buskers. Social media gave her a modest following, and on VK, she had begun live streaming short sessions to connect with friends and students who could not always attend in person. Sergey, her boyfriend, supported her by carrying fuel, lighting torches, and managing the camera. Fire breathing was simple in appearance, but hazardous in practice. Performers used fuel that atomized into a fine spray when expelled from the mouth, which, when ignited, produced a controlled fireball. The risks multiplied in cold weather. Lip balm, wool scarves, and wind gusts could all cause the flame to travel back. Safe practice required fire blankets, extinguishers, and assistants trained to react immediately. Anya and Sergey lacked that equipment. They carried only a fuel bottle and a lighter, relying on timing and positioning. That night, conditions were worse than usual. It was -8 degrees Celsius, and a light but unpredictable breeze swept across the square. Sergey reminded her to angle with the wind, but their setup placed her close to buildings where eddies formed. A handful of students gathered, drawn by the flicker of the torches. Two of them recognized her from previous streams and began recording on their phones. Despite the cold, Anya adjusted her scarf only halfway down, reluctant to expose her neck fully to the wind. Her first attempt produced a controlled fire plume, greeted with applause. The second, slightly larger, scattered briefly in the wind, but died down safely. On the third, she drew a deep breath, cheeks swelling as she expelled the spray in an arc. The gust shifted at that moment, pushing the ignited fuel back toward her. The stream caught the sudden flash as the fireball flared against her face. Her scarf ignited instantly, followed by her hair. The torch dropped from her hand, clattering against the icy pavement. Anya instinctively patted her face, but the fuel residue on her hands ignited, flames running across her sleeves. Sergey lunged forward with the bottle, trying to douse her, but in his panic left the cap half on. The splash only spread ignition along her arms. Witnesses later described the sound of fabric crackling and her short, rasping attempts to breathe. One student tore off his coat and smothered the scarf around her neck, while another kicked the torch away. The VK stream tilted sideways, capturing shouts and the hiss of burning wool as the camera fell to the ground. By the time the fire was subdued, she had suffered extensive burns. Her airway was scorched, her face and neck blackened in patches, with blisters forming around her hands. Sergey shouted for water, then for an ambulance, his voice raw as she collapsed to the pavement. She was loaded into an emergency vehicle within minutes, but on the way to the hospital, she went into cardiac arrest. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but her injuries were too severe. In the days following, fire authorities released new advisories, urging street performers to check wind conditions, avoid flammable clothing, and carry extinguishers. VK retroactively flagged archived streams with a safety disclaimer. Her burial was held quietly outside Kazan, where fellow performers left unlit torches and flowers at the graveside. The modest turnout reflected the close circle she kept, more co-workers and local buskers than distant relatives. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.